Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 202 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. A massive thank you for Kieran McNally. A friend of mine came on last week to talk about pain, and he's a pain and movement specialist, but he wrote a book around it, and it hasn't come out yet, but I will let you know when it comes out. You can support us on Buy Me a Coffee if you like. Link is in the description. Very fortunate to have a guest this week. He is a music journalist and the author of Bodies, Life and Death in Music. Ian Winwood, how are you doing, Ian?
Hello, I'm fine, thank you, Derek. Hello to you, hello to your listeners, and hello from a chilly London.
I was just going to say that because it is very cold here too. It's I have a little radiator here next to me, which is kind of keeping me going at the moment. I think I'm fortunate to be in that position to have this little thing here because it is very cold in this room. You've
got those burning police cars to keep you warm.
We do.
Have I just lost half of it? Have I just lost the room?
They're gone. Yeah. Do you know, really, on that one, and I know when I contacted you, you mentioned about, I hope everything's all right over there. This was last week.
Yeah.
And the night before, I mentioned to you I'd gone to see Queens of the Stone Age.
Yeah.
And it was a brilliant gig and all that. And I walked back to my mom's place. She lives in Dublin, so I walked back in that. The next night, Anne Marie was playing in the same arena, and none of the people could go into the town. And so it was like a case of they were all kind of abandoned at the end of the Liffey down towards the docks.
Yeah.
And it was like taxis and people picking them up. It was absolute mayhem. And that's just the kind of knock-on effect, obviously. But we don't really see burning police cars in our country that often. And it was obviously alarming. There's a lot of different reasons for it. But it was a very strange scene, Ian, for us to see that. So we normally just see it on the news.
I remember when we had the London riots, which your listeners may remember, which I think were 2012, and they went on for three nights of full-on rioting, not in the day. And I remember on either the second night or the third night, and I was somewhat oblivious because it took some time to spread through the city, and to some degree through the country. Forgive me, I know we've gone immediately into the weeds here. And I remember going to Sainsbury's. I live in Camden Town, which some of your listeners might know if they've come to London. It's kind of a vibrant part of the city. And I went to Sainsbury's, and Sainsbury's were closing at 5 o'clock. Normally, back then they used to close at midnight. They closed at 11. And I noticed all the shops were closing. It was like you could just feel something, and it was like, oh, something's really coming.
It's a weird feeling. Yeah.
But again, sparked by a violent incident.
Yeah.
It's really surprising and alarming to see. I guess what we keep under, what we as society keep under wraps, and is quite close to the surface at all times. Obviously, it sounds like in Dublin there were some malign forces at work. But yeah, crazy how close we are to total.
Yeah, it's just.
Sorry, I shouldn't have gone into that. Sorry.
No, not at all. So a question we always ask at the start, Ian, and people might be thinking, this is a man in London. That's not a London accent. Can you give us a history of your upbringing, please?
Yeah, of course I can. I was born in Barnsley. Which, for anyone who doesn't know, is in the People's Republic of South Yorkshire, sometimes known as the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire. And I was born a long time ago, 52 years ago. And I have been a Londoner. I don't know how it is in Dublin, but I like to think that if anyone lives in London, say if your good self or any of your listeners move to London, immediately you're a Londoner. So I've been a Londoner, like you are, like you're a New Yorker. And I have been a Londoner since I was 19 years old. So I have this, if you hear a proper Barnsley accent, if you hear the poet Ian Macmillan, for example, it makes me sound like Sir John Betjeman. It's just, I'm just not in the league. But to the untrained ear, apparently I have quite a strident Barnsley accent.
It's when we watch, there's bigger things to this as well. But when we watch TV here and on the BBC or Channel 4, the regular channels, we hear the London accent, and we might hear the Manchester accent, but we don't hear as much the Barnsley accent. A bit of
Oh,
Leeds sometimes. So
yeah.
it's always interesting. I talked about this on a few episodes ago about the idea of people being so close together in geographical location, but having accents that are completely different. I think it's very. I like it. I enjoy it. The Irish have it as well, where we've a lot of accents for a small country. And obviously in Britain, it's the same thing. And I love hearing all these different accents. I think they're great.
We have a man on our street in Camden, Roy, who is from Cork,
Mm.
and it's like listening to a horse racing commentator at the end of a very exciting race. I think perhaps you'll know this as Irish people. He's speaking so fast
Yeah.
that it's like I am hanging on to the horse, trying to just keep with him
Yeah.
what he's saying.
Um,
Yeah.
my
So
mom is from Cork, so I've spent a bit of time down there. It's very melodic. It's a beautifully melodic
yeah,
accent.
okay.
Yeah, I really like it, and but not all accents here are melodic, so it's all right. But the other thing, Ian, we always ask as well, and
Mhm.
we will get into this more in the podcast. When did you first become aware of mental health?
As a terminology, probably quite
Yeah.
recently. To be honest with you, when I was thrust into the bewildered arms of the British mental health, so in the mental NHS, we have the NHS over here,
Hmm.
the National Health Service, um, and things got really so bad for me that I became a person of interest to the mental health services here, and I guess that
Mm.
is the correct answer. And this would be sort of maybe 2017,
Yeah. Yeah.
2016, 2017-ish. But that's only in the sense that it was then given a name. Things were
Yeah.
given a name, like mental health is a name. Um, Working backwards, I was then able to see this sort of weird behavior of mine, which I haven't really rid myself of. I've just been largely able to channel it into avenues that won't kill me, really.
Yeah.
Um, but I recognize now sort of one of the diagnoses I had. There's been a number of diagnoses that I don't think are correct. I think that the mental health evaluation is in large part, to a degree, guesswork. We're
Yeah.
not. It's not. It doesn't seem to me to be as advanced as physical.
Hmm.
If you present yourself at a hospital with your fibia sticking out of your thigh, your femur sticking out of your thigh, they don't go, "Oh, I think you've got tonsillitis."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But there has been there have been um, mental health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, who have disagreed with each other about what has ailed me.
Mm.
That's what I mean by that. Um, but one thing that I do think is completely nailed on is impulse control disorder.
Yeah.
Uh, and I can recognize that. Looking back, I can recognize that in me in a child. Even when the ice cream van coming, I remember the ice cream van used to come every day, and it would be, how much ice cream can I buy? How much? And this
Mm.
feeling that I needed, and it's consistent. So I guess on some level it's always been with me, but in terms of thinking, okay, yeah, that's what that is, quite recently.
So, like, obviously, I read Bodies. I loved Bodies. It was brilliant. I found out afterwards that you were also involved with two Metallica books, which I also have. And it was one of those ones, what was the name of your co-writer in the Metallica books?
Paul Brannigan
Paul
from
Brannigan.
the Six Counties. Paul
So,
Brannigan.
oh, is he? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is what happened, right, Ian? So I'm reading Bodies, and I think, was this published in 2022 or 2023? So you go back to the start, obviously, and then I see the Metallica books, and I
Right.
think they're like the Bibles when it comes to Metallica's music. For me, I think they're
Wow.
incredible pieces of work. The research that goes into it. So I was very proud to have read obviously those two of your books as well, and throughout Bodies you talk about different bands and different artists. But what was the first record that you ever bought?
The first record I bought, or likely it was bought for me.
Mm.
And I'm pleased that it's quite a cool record, a classic actually, was Master Blaster, the single Master Blaster by Stevie Wonder, which is an exceptional song. And I took it back, or I was driven back from Woolworths in Barnsley by my mum. It must have been a cold day because we had the fire on. And not my lips to God's ears, this is exactly how it happened. And I took the single out of the sleeve, and I was reading the bits in the middle that are the credits and whatnot. I don't think I'd ever seen a record before. I'm not sure I had, to be honest. We didn't have a record player when I was a young child, and so we must have got a record player, and this was my first record. And I raised my eye. Imagine this is a camera shot. I raised my eyes, and the top half of the disc had buckled and melted to the heat of the fire. And I remember kind of running to my mum and saying, knowing the answer, but needing to ask anyway, "Mum, is this supposed to happen?" And she said, "No, love, it's not." And because I'm a spoiled only child, and my mother is a remains a fabulous mother, she drove me back into town, which is a couple of miles away.
Wow.
Drove me back into town, and we bought another one. So that was my first two records.
Yeah. What an introduction to music in general. And obviously your love for it started there, but like, how does someone how do they think about becoming a music journalist? How did that come about?
Again, my mum, this weekly, but at the time actually fortnightly magazine. There's a big backstory about how I discovered my first issue of Kerrang, and I did an interview recently for BBC Six Music. It's interesting what you learn about doing this, and that's going to be actually broadcast next week. It'll probably have been broadcast by the time this is broadcast, Eric. But I told the whole preamble in a 20-minute interview, and it was sort of like, shut up, you just edit. You edit yourself on the page, edit yourself when you're talking. So anyway, I became aware of this magazine called Kerrang, which although, and it's weird, Derek, because at the time, I don't know if forgive my imperialist blindness here for not knowing if Kerrang is available.
No, it certainly is.
Right, okay, fabulous. I've been on assignment to Dublin numerous times. So at the time, people think that Kerrang is a metal magazine, and it's not quite correct to say that it is. Of course, it covers those bands, but Kerrang is an onomatopoeia. It's a word that sounds like the word that the thing it describes. I always think slush is a great.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's fabulous, isn't it? Swing even.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kerrang, it's the sound of a guitar hit with force. So it's bands that give it some welly. It's loud music. And at the time, and that was great because I'm not, although there are numerous metal bands that I like, I'm not a metalhead really. But I do love kind of energetic, loud music. And it wasn't a great period in Kerrang's history. It was sort of, I didn't really like many of the bands that it covered. It hadn't really yet started doing Metallica and the younger bands that would catch my ear. There was a lot of sort of hair metal and rubbish, actually. Yeah. But there was something about the way it was presented, and I do write about this briefly in Bodies, in the book, that just sort of caught my eye in a way that The Enemy and Melody Maker hadn't. I just felt that I was on its wavelength, and more importantly, its writers were on mine. And it was never on the back foot. It was never superior or snobby. It was a people's magazine. Yeah. That's what it was. I don't know if I've ever actually figured that out, but yeah, it was a people's magazine. And I used to be unable to sleep on the Tuesday. It used to come out on a Wednesday, and I would be unable to sleep on the Tuesday night. It would always be a terrible night's sleep because I was so looking forward to it. And then it went weekly. Anyway, this coincided with when a parent asks their child, have you had to think about what you'd like to do when you leave school, when you grow up? Which I don't think I've ever quite done. But when you grow up, and my mum asked me that question, and I said, yeah, I'd like to. I didn't even say I want to be a music journalist. I said, yeah, I'd like to write for Kerrang, as if that was the thing.
Yeah.
And she said, well, somebody does those jobs. I don't see why it shouldn't be you. And
Good
there
point.
we were. It took me a long time to get onto Kerrang. Actually, it took me another 15 years. I was 29 when I finally landed a gig there. But yeah, that was always my destination, Planet Kerrang.
It's amazing that the assignments that you all of a sudden get sent on. Like, it's not just go down the road to a pub. Like, and maybe sometimes it is, but I mean, sometimes you were sent across the world, and you travel to so many places. And like you said, you were 19 when you started.
29.
29.
I was old.
You were an old journalist at that stage. But that kind of thrust you into a different world altogether. When you are, following bands or interviewing bands and things like that. You talked about impulse earlier, and that kind of idea, and you talk about drug taking a lot in the book and the stuff that you got into. Is all of that like a destructive package? You think if it's not just you. Do you think if anyone was in the position that you were in with that impulse control problem, that it could have happened to them too?
Yeah, we went. My wife and I, Ruth, went to see a film last night, and I took umbrage with. We have. I don't know. Again, forgive me. I don't know the system in Ireland, but here in the UK, you have a little. The certification comes up, and it was a 15 film, and it tells you what to look out for, like a little warning. And it said offensive language, drug misuse. Right.
Okay.
The film was Maestro. The biopic of Leonard Bernstein, and brief drug misuse. And what you had was a scene where Leonard Bernstein and some of his friends are taking cocaine, but they take no more than a line each.
Okay.
And I sort of took issue with that because that's drug use.
Okay.
Drug is illegal, don't get me wrong, I'm aware of that, but that's drug use. That's not drug abuse or even misuse. It's drug use. In the way that having a pint is not alcohol abuse, it's just having a pint. I was a drug abuser. There's no doubt about that. I just could not. Now that's not to say that I did it all the time. Okay, that would be wrong to say that. I didn't. But when I did it, and it became more frequent. Now I'm aware that probably in the pubs of Dublin, up in Temple Bars, or certainly here in Camden, and maybe in Barnsley as well. It's probably not. I'm not suggesting that this is a unique world. Where people generally know how to get hold of this stuff, it seems to me. But the ecosystem of the music industry, and we're going back sort of 20, 22, 23, but sort of between 23 and 10 and 10 years ago, perhaps. It would be wrong to say that everybody was taking drugs. That's not correct at all. But no one seemed to be in any way perturbed that they knew that people were taking drugs. And if they were perturbed about it, and if they were offended by it, and there are reasons to be offended, one of the things that was really important to me to mention in Bodies, and I do it very quickly, it only takes a couple of sentences, but I really have never seen it before in a book of its kind, is the sort of, just how deeply unethical the cocaine trade is. There are communities that have been bludgeoned into submission, that are dangerous places. Untold numbers of civilians murdered for this trade. People who wouldn't dream back in the day, people who wouldn't have dreamed of buying South African fruit. Before the end of apartheid, were happily hoovering up at least a more equally vile trade. So there are reasons to be offended by it, above and beyond its illegality. But if they were offended, they certainly didn't feel, it certainly wasn't a safe space to say so.
Yeah.
So you had that ecosystem, and you had sort of a man of my appetites, and it sort of, it was a very fertile petri dish to create a monster for me.
Yeah. Is it, or was it hard to talk about or to write about?
When I Bodies was an incredibly difficult book to write, Derek, but likely not for the reasons that you perhaps think it was. When I started it, I did not have the technical skill required to write the book that it became.
Okay.
Because and I find it very difficult to explain what the book is, even now. I mean, the expanded edition with an extra chapter came out this year, but originally it came out last year. The book in its slightly smaller form, shorter form, came out this year, and I've been very lucky that people have asked to speak to me about it, and it's lovely. I really love it. I love doing all of this, but I'm terrible at describing what the damn thing is. And it's in part a memoir, and it's in part a piece of journalism, and it's storytelling, and it's sort of, and on one page it's very, very serious, incredibly serious in some places, but then quite quickly it becomes, at least I hope, funny.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the skill to pull off that kind of roller coaster ride without people flying out of the car.
Yeah.
Without my reader flying out of the car because the handbrake turns were too. It was just too jolty. It just didn't work. And so it took 11 drafts to get it right. It was like painting. It was like painting the Golden Gate Bridge or the Humber Bridge. You'd paint it, and then you get to the end, and you'd have to start again.
Yeah.
Because while the end was brand shiny new, the beginning was looking a bit tatty again. And what I thought I would have, so that was the really difficult bit. What I thought I would have to do, because there are some really stark revelations about myself in there. And I thought that this is going to be really difficult to put down on the page. So maybe I'll write it in third person, as if it's about someone else. So he, rather than I. And as if to kind of fool myself that I'm writing about someone else. And it was actually the easiest part of the gig. I loved doing it. There's something that I'm quite embarrassed by that happens at the end of chapter 9. And I do that. That's the exception that proves the rule. But it was a blast writing about this kind of depravity. Because if I'm telling a story, Derek, about a musician that has taken their own life, which is an example from the book, and that musician's brother, who was also in the band, is speaking to me, and he's never really spoken about this to a journalist, and I've never met him before. That's precious cargo. I have a duty of care to that story. And other stories as well, notably one involving a notorious Welsh band. This is really precious cargo. But if it's me, these are my stories that have happened to me. I can present those any way I like. I can crack wise if I want to. So that was quite liberating. And I found it remarkably and surprisingly easy.
It is a book. I was talking to people about it as I was reading, like I normally do. If I'm enjoying a book, I'll start telling people about the book. So I was talking about the book, and the idea of what it was about came up. And, I gave it to them in kind of sections, because I felt that that's what it was. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of different things. But Frightened Rabbit, you mentioned the band Frightened Rabbit in the book. And I hadn't, they weren't, I probably heard the name, but I hadn't heard their music. But like you say, the singer took his own life, unfortunately, and his brother talks to you about it in the book. and the pressures of and maybe regrets of doing things that they wish they hadn't done. But
Yeah.
I went back and listened to the music then, and I sent it on to a friend, and the two of us are like spellbound by this genius of this music. It's
Right.
incredible. It's
Right.
incredible. And I look I don't know if I looked at it then from a different perspective because I knew what happened to the singer and what he was going through at the time, and especially on this Letterman performance that they went on to Letterman and performed
Mm.
there, and I was deeply moved by the whole thing. And when you talked to me there about, like, speaking to his brother who hadn't done that, like you said, that there's a weight to it then, and there's a certain expectation on you, I suppose, then of how to write about this subject in a certain manner. You speak beautifully about um you mean about your own mental health. You do add humor to it as well,
Mm.
and that's, I guess, that's your style, which is brilliant, that you can do that looking back now. But you went through a hell of a time. Um and that spoke to me loudly, and that's when I wanted to contact you to see if you come on. The same way when you talk about your drug use, like, is this a different way that you look at it now of looking back at a person who was obviously damaged or felt damaged, and what do you take from that now, from that person you saw?
I think that let me answer this question
Mm-hmm.
with full honesty, which I don't think I understood when I wrote the book. Uh, at no point, so there's an incident that is the central plank of the book. It's the only thing I keep under wraps. It's the central plank of the book, of the personal aspect of the book, the memoir aspect of the book. And it involves the death of my father. Now, that's not a spoiler because I tell
Yeah.
the reader in the introduction that he no longer walks among us, that Eric Winwood no longer walks among us. But I don't. The story of his passing is the big reveal in the center of the book. Now, I've had better days,
Mm.
and I'm certain that he also has had better days than the day he died. So I don't imagine that it was beneficial to my mental health
Yeah.
that day. I don't think. However, I do now wonder if what really, because it's after that tragedy that things really, that the handbrake really comes off the car, and I'm really skidding into life-threatening behavior. And I wonder now, because with the death of my father, it meant that I got as one of his of what it was me as his eldest son and my half brother and a half brother, and that was it for dependents. So we got half of his estate. Now it wasn't a life-changing amount of money, but it was £64,000. I don't know why I'm being coy, which is enough to go crazy with
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of years. And that's duly what I did. And I do wonder that without that financial emancipation, what might have happened to me?
Mm.
Because, unless you're sort of just drinking a bottle of whiskey a night, which wasn't really my thing, alcoholism, it was never really my
Mm-hmm.
thing. Cocaine was £60 a gram,
Yeah.
back then. That's so, 60, €70 a gram. It's cheaper now, but that's a lot. So it kind of, you kind of regulated by how much you can afford. And suddenly I could afford 4 or 5 grams a night. And I spent all of the money on that. I blew the whole lot. I bought a couple of suits, and I went to Australia because I'd always wanted to go. But that aside, I certainly spent £50,000, and I wonder if it wasn't just. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself. If it wasn't just the money
Mm-hmm.
that allowed me to just binge on this kind of impulse control disorder mindset, really. And I do think I do increasingly think about what might have happened had had he not died, for one thing, or had he died and I inherited his stack of crappy spy novels that he liked to read. So I think that played a big part of it, and
Yeah,
I didn't know that when I wrote the book. It had not occurred to me.
I I found you mentioned a notorious Welsh band. We can also mention Biffy Clyro. The profiles.
They're not the notorious Welsh
They're no,
band.
they're not the notorious Welsh band. Just to get that out there, but those kind of profiles of bands, which I've always loved. I've always loved, like, I know I talked about your Metallica books, which are a bit more expansive, obviously, but
Yeah.
profiles of bands and how a journalist follows them and how he sees them and maybe gets attached to them in a certain way, like a fondness for just chatting with them or obviously their music as well. I do love that kind of thing. How do you've seen and talked to a lot of bands. How do you pick the ones that you wanted to put in the book?
I was very deliberate about that. And it's weird because I keep thinking about artists. I think, oh, they would have been good, as if this is kind of an ongoing organism that I can add to and subtract from. I was thinking last night that The Darkness would have been good because they are certainly in the UK attained a uncommon degree of fame.
Yeah.
3 nights at Wembley Arena. And then they went away and recorded a new album, and they couldn't fill Alexandra
Yeah.
Palace, which is, I think they got about 5,000 people at Alexandra Palace. That's terrifying. I picked people who I thought would serve the story well. Insofar as I could figure that out, bearing in mind I was essentially making things up as I went along. Okay. There's quite a lot cut out of Borders.
Okay.
There could one day be a bonus disc version of the offshoots that I cut out. One of the criticisms I've had of the book, and I think it's fair because I would criticize it myself, is that it's quite a male book.
Okay.
Now, having said that, there is a section that deals with sexual abuse and the bullying of females in the music industry. And that's supposed to be like a self-contained section that says, I am aware of this. I'm not blind to it.
Yeah.
So I did contact in my defense, I did contact 3 female musicians, 2 of whom privately told me they didn't want to speak with me. One of whom I'll tell you who it is. The third one was Skin from Skunk Anansie.
Oh yeah.
It's quite a white book as well. Skin from Skunk Anansie, and I tried to get her twice, and I sort of know her to say hello to, but nothing more than that. She might know my face. I don't imagine she knows my name.
Yeah.
Or remembers my name. And I thought, oh, she'll be fabulous at this. A fabulous talent, female, person of color, lesbian. Not to sound cynical, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great, but not for that reason. For that reason, for what she had to say, or what I hope she had to say. And twice I was knocked back. And when the book had gone to press, I was able to interview her for a publication, not the book. And I said, oh, I would have been lovely to speak to you. I'm so sorry you couldn't do it. And she had no idea what I was talking about.
Oh.
And she said, I would have talked to you, and I would have spoken to you. And what can you do?
Yeah, I know.
So I was aware of it. I've forgotten the original question. I'm so busy doing the woe is me.
No, it wasn't. It was. It was
these feminists getting on my case. I tried.
It was that thing of just basically like picking the bands that you wanted to have in it.
I remember doing Biffy Clyro I write for the Telegraph over here, which is a crazy right-wing broadsheet newspaper. But the culture section is great, and and its politics are not my own. But in terms of the freedom to write what I like, an incredible gig. And they let me interview Biffy. This was the summer of 2020. Yeah, 2020. And what a weird time.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask Simon Neil, the singer and songwriter, principal songwriter. I was going to ask him if he'd speak to me, and I said to him, and I know him well, and I said to him, Simon, I'm writing this book about music and mental, and I got to music and mental, and he said, would you like me to speak to you? I'll speak to you. And his I would suggest that his is, no, that's unfair to other interviewees that appeared, but his contribution is incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Because for the first time, it's chapter 6, and for the first time, I sort of give the reins of the story over to someone else,
Yeah.
and we see the music industry through his eyes, and through a band that aren't particularly renowned, at all renowned actually, for wild or crazy behavior, who are as unified as any band, certainly that I've ever encountered. You know, the rhythm section are twins, and the third member, Simon, they've known him since they were 6 years old. This is not a marriage of convenience. You know, these aren't people that have answered an advert on a news wall looking for a drummer. No time wasters, please. This is and still it knocked them sideways on more than one occasion. Priceless. His contribution is priceless to the book. But yeah, I didn't necessarily want particularly famous people. I didn't necessarily want cool, quote unquote, cool bands. I just wanted people that would serve the story, and I got, with the exception of the female contingent that wasn't to be, I got really lucky. I think either that or my antenna is brilliant. Maybe a bit. Let's go a bit of both.
Go a bit of both.
Yeah.
Give yourself some credit, you know. But
I'm not going to be. I'm not shy about doing that, Derek. So
that's all right.
Encourage me.
But I will say I agree totally with you. I obviously am aware of Biffy Clyro. I have a couple of their albums, and I think they're obviously a very solid band. He obviously I knew nothing about what went on with him.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything to do with it at all, and his honesty within it, and the idea of success coming, and maybe him feeling that when all this happened that he let others down, and that, you know, they would have been more famous if he'd just gone and done it. But then you kind of counterbalance that kind of argument, I guess, with the frightened rabbit thing of maybe, you know, let's pull it back a little bit because it's gone too far, you know. And it's an incredible look into mental health, and it's an incredible look. You just mentioned there about the sexual, you know, you talked about the problem within the music industry and the journalists who were getting abused. And, you know, it just reminds me of how much is in the book, because, you know, you forget certain parts and then it's reminded, and you go the whole section that you bring up again. That's why it's so hard to pin down, because you've looked into this, you know, so thoroughly. How long does it take? Well, I know you mentioned how many drafts it was, but how long did it take you from start to finish to write it?
Farm to table, Derek, it took about 20, maybe 18 months.
Right.
And then what happens is you see it in print, but what you get, and is this a visual medium at all? Or is
it is, but you can go over and grab something if you. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Ah, yeah.
In my arse there, viewers.
That's all right.
So this is the only copy I've got of this. This is known as a proof.
Right.
And this is sent out to, you'd likely know this, Derek, but for the viewers and listeners who don't. And this is what's sent out to reviewers, and this comes out a couple of months before the actual finished version that will be sold in the shops. And I've taken stuff out of this. I've looked through this and thought, yeah, there's a little bit here and about a great band called Jellyfish.
Yeah.
That I thought, I don't need that. That just drags the story out of shape. If you'll allow me a terrible name drop, Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day
of course.
once said to me, my dear friend Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day once said to me that to make truly great, to make worthwhile work, to make something worthwhile creatively, he was talking about music, but I think it applies. You have to sacrifice your ego.
Yeah.
sort of just look and think this bit's not working, this bit is working. Didn't matter if something took me 3 months to put together or a month to put together. If I knew it deep down it wasn't working, I cut it. Just be ruthless, sacrifice your ego. So anyway, what happens is you get one of these and you're able to make selective changes. I tested the patience of my publisher. And to the point where I was making changes on the day that it went to press properly. I was still requesting changes, just bits that were bugging. I wake up to, this is, again, my lips to God's ear. Wake up in the middle of the night and go, yeah, that bit's just not, that word isn't quite right, And you have to go page 257, line 17. Yeah. So it's far. If God forbid, touch wood, this won't happen. But if anyone listening to this feels they have a book inside them, and we're visited by another worldwide pandemic that forces us to shut down, to be locked down, then's your time to write the book. This is a lockdown book, and I'm not sure of the chronology in the Republic of Ireland, Derek, but we had a monster of a second lockdown here. It went from, I can tell you exactly where it went from because it was the day before what was supposed to be my wedding. So the wedding,
but for
the third time the wedding got postponed. We managed it in the end a year later. The wedding got postponed, and we didn't come out of it again until May. So December to May, and I really truly don't really remember the lockdown at all. I just remember writing a book.
Yeah.
So it was a great time to write it. The only thing it was a great time for, obviously, great time to write a book.
Well, it's funny that my last guest who I mentioned earlier on did the exact same thing, wrote his book during lockdown, and again, it's coming out hopefully this month. So it's amazing. I was lucky to get you the copy with the extra chapter in it. So the more reading for me, and I do love that. But when you write about like a subject like Metallica, for instance, because I mean, and this isn't any disrespect to Biffy Clyro, but I'm sure they'd agree that Metallica are like, with regards to giant bands, they are one of the giants. Is it daunting for you and for Paul, obviously, as well, to approach that subject?
No, it's not. To be honest,
but you're not like, this is from someone else who doesn't write, but I just worry, and maybe you don't worry about these things at all, Ian, and if you don't, great. But if you get not that you're going to get something wrong, but if something's maybe borderline right or wrong, you'll have all these little trolls and things coming into the comment sections or wherever they can to kind of go, well, that's not actually right. That kind of pushback that even if it's from people who, are just doing it in comment sections, that doesn't bother you at all, no?
No.
Good.
No, not at all. Who cares? I've never been asked that before. Who cares? There is here's something interesting. This is a scoop for you.
Good.
There is, I won't mention it on the podcast in case, the incident on the podcast in case Metallica, the mighty boot of Metallica lands on you as well.
Yeah.
But there's we recall an incident involving Lars Ulrich, the drummer, in the second book, that we knew had to go in the book. It's something that he's not proud of. And it had never been reported in the press, and we knew it had to go in the book. Otherwise, it was just PR we were doing.
Yeah.
We knew it had to go in. We had someone who saw the incident who went on the record for us anonymously and agreed that if we got sued by Metallica, he or she would take the witness stand and verify what it was we had alleged. And I had asked Lars about it in an interview, and he said, no, that's a private matter.
Okay.
And the book came out, and, bearing in mind that the second edition, which is, it's in a book called Into the Black, came out, I forget, 2012, 2014.
Yeah.
Neither Paul nor I have been allowed anywhere near Metallica since. So, and between us, we'd probably interviewed them 40 times prior to that.
Wow.
We were known to Metallica. I've been on Metallica's private jet, so we were just cast out of that ecosystem, and I don't think we'll ever be allowed to return. But if you're going to write something, write the truth and write what you know. You know, I think I can bore for England on this, to be honest with you. And if we rejoin the European Union, I can bore for the EU about this. It is not my job. It's not my job it's not my job to be running about starting fires and picking fights for the sake of it. But absolutely, it's not my job to be an unpaid by the music industry, an unpaid part of a band's or a record company's PR department. That's not in my job description. And if one thing has really changed in my lifetime as a music journalist, particularly for music-only publications, and get away with the Telegraph let me write a hit piece on Metallica just like earlier this year, because I've just reached the point where I hate them so much. Now I realize that the opposite of love, hate isn't the opposite of love. Yeah. Indifference is the opposite of love. And I have come to hate Metallica. Okay. It's completely unrelated to me being excommunicated. They're just phoning it in. They're greedy. They're just they almost turn my stomach, to be honest.
I have this thing about Metallica. So when I was quite young, I had tapes at the Metallica on cassette tape, and then like loads of people tell this same thing, but there's a truth to it that, you know, when Nirvana came along, I thought, well, I don't need Metallica anymore. Oh. Now, yeah, that was for me. They didn't really matter that much anymore. So then they brought out Load and Reload, and I listened to them, and I was like, they're actually not very good. But obviously, I still appreciated their earlier music, which I really liked. And you're like, then the Napster thing happened, and it was like, oh Jesus, I don't think that looks good for. Well, you know, I can understand why you're annoyed, but you know, you're a massive band. And then
you're right, though.
No, absolutely, because we can't just allow having, you know, the idea of, because if it was still happening now, be carnage in the music industry. But you know, unfortunately, it was Lars that was doing it, and people don't like Lars. It's just the fact of life. But I enjoy reading about Metallica more than listening to them. So when your book came out, the first one, I was like, this is amazing. And obviously I had to wait for the second one, not that long, but I had to wait for the second one. And they're a band that I love reading about the lore of Metallica, rather than, I wouldn't stick Metallica on to listen to them in, you know, anything. Okay. It's just, they're just not for me anymore. I don't know why.
Well, my problem is, I'm sure this is really destroying their self-confidence.
Yeah, no, I think they'll be all right.
My problem is that there's a theory that I have a lot of sympathy with, that a band does its best work. A band does their best work in the first 7 to 8 years. Yeah. And it's not universally true. Green Day went much longer. Excuse me, I burped. Sorry. Green Day went much longer. And some do, you know. But you'd be surprised for how often that's true.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's ever been more true for anyone but Metallica. For Metallica, it's more true than for anyone else. Now, in the 90s, they were still fascinating because they worked so hard not to repeat themselves. Mm-hmm. So it was that intent was truly honorable. And even Saint Anger, which is a dreadful record,
it's terrible,
is brand new thinking.
Yeah,
brand new thinking. But then that was 20 years ago, and since then they have sort of been like they've become a Metallica. They've become their own tribute band. I've said it before, but they've become their own tribute band, and they're just.
Actually, can I ask you, Ian?
Yeah.
Can I ask you?
It's so disappointing.
Yeah. Can I ask you then what you thought of Some Kind of Monster?
I thought it was, again, it's the most interesting thing they've done in the last 20 years, with the exception of Lulu. They made an album with Lou Reed called Lulu. So Metallica are still able to access that fucking weird side of themselves.
Yeah,
Really strange
that's
side
weird.
of themselves. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And fabulous, good for them. That I want that. I don't just want this nostalgia now.
Yeah.
And this, gouging the fans.
Yeah.
And some kind of monster. I write about it briefly in the book, just very quickly. I tell this story in the book. I was the first person to interview Metallica. I interviewed them on the day that Robert Trujillo joined the band at their HQ in San Rafael. San Rafael? I think it's San Rafael. It's in the book anyway.
Yeah.
And they hadn't been interviewed for literally 2 or 3 years. And it had all completely fallen apart, and they were trying to put themselves back together. And I was filmed by the film crew. I was filmed by Joe Berlinger, the co-director of Some Kind of Monster, and his film crew. Like I wasn't nervous enough.
Yeah.
And I had to sign a release form. You have to sign a release form, and you have to have your photograph taken. And at the time, they couldn't say, or certainly weren't telling me what the project was, what shape the project would take. It would be, it might have been the series, the reality show, The Osbournes, was incredibly popular back then, about Ozzy and his family. They wondered if it might be that kind of thing, but what they wanted or what they hoped for was the feature film that it became. So, Julie, I spent the next sort of year, it came out in 2004, Some Kind of Monster. I spent the next year telling everyone who would listen, everyone I knew and many people I didn't know, that I was going to feature in this upcoming film about Metallica, because I'd been told that I would.
Yeah.
And as I say in the book, I can only marvel at its ability to tell its story without me. I remain on the cutting room floor. I'm not even in any of the extras.
No, it's not fair.
I think it's remarkable, because the answer to the question that you asked 15 minutes ago, Derek, I think it's remarkable because it needs to be placed in the time that it was released.
Yeah.
I'm old enough that I think it's a recent thing, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not a recent thing. It's coming up 20 years ago that it was released. People didn't talk about this stuff then. We've become much more used to people saying, need to take a break. I mean, it's a portrait, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a portrait of a band going mad.
Yeah.
Collectively going mad.
Yeah.
And now, we're used to Arlo Parks and Sam Fender, numerous people saying, Yard Act did it, saying, do you know what, we need to just work on our mental health. The idea of Metallica, a metal band, and with this sort of alpha male frontman, presenting themselves as being so fractured and broken by the weight of their creation, because that's all it is.
Yeah.
That's all that's done it. It's Metallica. The Metallica thing, monster, has crushed its constituent parts.
Yeah.
And to put that on film and release it to your constituents is incredible. I have nothing. I cannot speak. I mean, I wish it perhaps weren't directed in quite such a TV reality kind of way, where the reaction shots. But that's a stylistic.
That's a choice. Yeah.
That's a stylistic quibble.
Yeah.
It's substance. Bravo to them.
It's great.
Bravo. Because musicians. Sorry, Derek. I was just.
No, you're good.
One of the problems musicians face is that they lack the vocabulary to complain about things that are justified. They are justified to complain about, because they think, mates of ours, they work in, and I don't necessarily mean the worst jobs in Ireland, but they work in a call center, on the outskirts of Dublin. Or they do a job that they don't necessarily love, but don't necessarily hate either. And here are these people doing the thing, making a living from the thing they always dreamed of doing. So they feel almost treasonous, as if in complaining about it. So they can become grateful.
Yeah.
When really they're not, because without them, none of this music exists. None of this business exists. And they worry that it's so easy to be reductive and uncharitable and say, oh God, we played the O2 Arena, that's in London, or we played the Point in Dublin last night, but we're knackered and we've been on the road for too long. And you go, oh my God, poor you.
Yeah,
Poor you. Must be so difficult.
Yeah.
Having 8, 12, 16, 20,000 people, dear dums.
Yeah.
And Metallica just kind of went bollocks to that. I don't know if they even considered it. And they presented a look inside the machine, and I think it broke open. And not for the first time, because Metallica had already broken music open and made music heavier and more interesting.
Yeah.
And they did that again with their, internal fissures and fractures. And I whenever I think about it, and I don't think about it all that often, perhaps I'm blinded by my hatred
that's
of Metallica, but they absolutely bravo.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree 100% with that. I want to ask you a couple more questions. Here's a tough question for you, Ian. Who's the greatest artist / band in your opinion?
Oh, I can't really answer that. I've learned to make a distinction.
Yeah.
Between my favorite, and the greatest.
That's fair. I think that's a very good way of putting it. So, who's your favorite?
Green Day are my favorite.
Really?
Yeah, they are. I mean, my favorite. They are.
Yeah.
I've actually got the new album, which is coming in January. Outlaws, and I don't listen to it. I've had it for a few days and I don't listen to it in case it lets me down, because I think they're due a big one.
Yeah.
They're due a really good one, and I'm not sure one. Hopefully they have it in them. But yeah, I love Green Day. But there's just so many. My favorite singer songwriter would be Elvis Costello. That would be, but there's just so much music, and I think it doesn't matter, actually.
No, it
respectfully. I've started listening to. My wife and I lived in New York for 6 months at the start of the year. My wife works for Penguin, the publisher Penguin, and she's quite a high up over there, so she was able to finagle a 6 month secondment to their Manhattan office. So we went and lived in New York, and I sort of didn't go to many concerts because I discovered, to my shock, this egregious assault on my human rights, that in America, music journalists overwhelmingly have to pay for guest list places.
Oh, really?
I mean, I know, right? Your listeners will be shedding a tear on my behalf.
Devastated.
It's just the worst. But I was able to, because I was writing about it, I was able to get in to see a band called the Dead and Company.
Okay.
It might not mean anything over here. It's the continuum band of the Grateful Dead.
Oh.
Featuring some members of the Grateful Dead and some members of the drummer from Primus, actually.
Oh.
And ex-members of the Allman Brothers bands, John Mayer, who's enormous in the States, enormously popular. And they played 2 nights at Citi Field, right? Citi Field is where the New York Mets play.
Yeah.
So that's like 100,000 people. Who are these bands?
Yeah.
And they never come over here. They never come over to Europe. And I was just watching this band improvise and jam and play. I went both nights, and they played a completely different set both nights. So I've sort of discovered this whole new. I've lived in a mansion of music, for certainly all of my adult life and all of my teenage life. And it's like, I know every inch of this. There are some rooms that I don't go in. I don't go in the hip hop room as often perhaps as I should, but I know it's there. But suddenly there's this whole new room that I didn't even know existed, full of these jam bands.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of, that's my latest thing at the moment.
It's good.
It's what?
It's good that you can still find this.
Yeah. Bands like Goose and so there's very quickly, I know we're sort of running out of time here, but there's an app called nugs.net.
Okay.
Which I really recommend people, you subscribe to it. If you're looking for something new, I cannot recommend it high enough. And it's got things like, hundreds of Springsteen concerts on there.
Right.
It's It's all concerts. I
Yeah.
should. And you look through the A to Z list. You think, well, I've never heard of that band. Do you want me to do it now?
Go for it. Yeah. Have a look.
Let me do it again. So let's go. And this is how I do it, right? It's forgive me, everybody. It's right. So let's go search, and we've got artist.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got like A to Z on the artist. So we've got a band here called Alibaba's Tahini, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you go. All right. Okay. So they're not so many. That's all right. That's a bad example. Cut that out. But so you look and you'll go. You can look up cake. If this better work, right? Okay, and you look up these bands. So yeah, I'm looking up Goose, right?
Yeah.
Called Goose, which I knew wouldn't let me down. And the first song, Hot Tea, is clocking in at 21 minutes, right?
Wow.
At a festival in Oregon. And you know
Yeah.
that's a jam band.
That's
right?
jam.
And some of them are enormous in the States. You know, like Fish, Phish.
Yeah.
We'll do 10 nights at Madison Square Garden. They're playing this.
Yeah, it's mad.
They're the ones after U2 playing the Sphere, and I just find this fabulous. So I've sort of gone beyond what's the best. Who cares?
Yeah, you're right. It is. It's a redundant question, but I'm glad I asked it, because then we found out about that. But one more question, Ian, and we always ask this: what do you like to do in your spare time?
I like to sleep.
It's good.
I mean, my whole life is sort of spare time, really.
Okay, right.
Because I write for a living, and it doesn't feel like work to me. Although I do work fantastically hard at it, I do drive myself mad trying to get it right. I don't want to give the impression that it's a DOS of some kind. It's not. But yeah, I love to take an afternoon nap. If the football club, and I'll take one after we've finished here, there's no doubt. If the football club I support, Barnsley Football Club, are playing anywhere near London, I will go and see them. We would have been playing Sutton today, which is in the FA Cup, which is in deepest South London. But we got booted out of the FA Cup for fielding an ineligible player. So that didn't come together.
But you did get that the other day when you got a goal, when the guy, they just bumped
wrong with that goal.
No, I agree. There was absolutely nothing.
That should never have been a goal.
Well, I don't know. I think the keeper was a little bit light.
The keeper was dicking around, but I'm not sure he deserved to be bulldozed over.
Maybe. It was hilarious though. And I thought of you immediately, because nobody had ever answered to an email about like, well, I want to listen to my team on the radio. That hasn't happened. Yeah, that never happened. So
3 o'clock on iFollow.
I loved it, but I'll always have Barnsley on my mind now. Whenever I see Barnsley, I'll think of you.
Please.
Yes, I will for sure. You've been like, honestly, I honestly said to you already, I can't thank you enough. You've been a brilliant guest. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you.
Now, I think I garbled on in some places.
Never.
I do apologize.
Oh, no, I disagree.
When I said I've learned to edit myself, it's an ongoing process.
That's all right. We're all trying to figure that out. Ian, just stick with me for 1 minute. I'll just close it out. We'll get a quick photo of the screen.
Of course.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. I also want to thank John for doing all the tech for me. I always thank my mum, my dad, my granddad, excuse me, Jer and Calvin. We're on the YouTube and an Instagram, Facebook, X. I should have said, go buy Bodies. It's an absolutely brilliant read, as you've maybe be aware of my enthusiasm for it. We're also, on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. Thanks everyone for watching and for listening today. Once again, Ian, thank you so much.
My pleasure. It really has been a pleasure. Thank you, Derek. And more
thanks a lot.
Power to your elbow.
Thanks a million. All right, everyone. See you later. Bye.